What does it actually look like when technology is used for good in real communities with real people doing real work? This is Tech for Good Voices, and I'm Annie Legg, host of this podcast on behalf of Tech for Good Southwest. This podcast is about the people using technology to build something better. Honest conversations about what's working, what's hard, and what communities across the Southwest are learning along the way. So if you're in the tech sector, or a charity or social enterprise, this podcast is for you. And I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome everybody to the Tech for Good Southwest podcast. And my guest today is Dama Sathianathan. And Dama is senior partner at Bethnal Green Ventures, which is Europe's leading early stage Tech for Good VC. BGV backs ambitious founders using technology to tackle pressing social and environmental challenges at scale, and their programme comes with a £60,000 investment. Dama describes her job as banging the drum for more tech for good entrepreneurship and investment in the wider VC and tech ecosystem, finding incredible founders from all walks of life, which is exactly what I want to talk to her about today. Because BGV does this differently from most VCs, and after nearly 9 years, Dama has seen what works, what doesn't, and who gets backed when you build the process differently. So welcome, Dama.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Annie. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. So Dama, for anyone who hasn't come across BGV before, how would you describe it?
Exactly, and how you described us as well. But for anyone who doesn't know Bethnal Green Ventures, we're actually not based in Bethnal Green, which is the first
demystify that. Yeah,
I always like to point out. We're based in London. We still have an E postcode, so still in East London, where we started off nearly 14 years ago now. But essentially, we are an early stage investor. When I say early stage, I really mean early on the spectrum of when someone just has an idea or has a bit of traction in terms of validating their business and their potential tech idea and want to do this at scale. So want to look for equity investment to actually unlock some type of growth to drive positive outcomes for people and planet. I live in this murky world of venture capitalism, which is always a bit murky in a sense that it's oftentimes opaque, but also within the realm of sort of impact investing, relatively straightforward in terms of what we back, who we back, and what we want to achieve as well. Because ultimately, we've driven our investment thesis to be relatively straightforward in terms of the outcomes we'd like to see in the world. And that's mostly around backing founders who are using technology to contribute to a sustainable planet, to a more inclusive society, and to healthy lives. So very, very much sort of outcomes driven in terms of who we want to back.
Amazing. And technology is obviously at the heart of what you're investing in. So you talk about tech for good. What does that actually mean to you at BGV? Because it's a phrase that's often used pretty loosely, and certainly I find it's all encompassing, right? So, but I'd love to hear how you actually define it and your kind of working title for that.
Yeah, I think tech for good is relatively broad by design because again, we didn't. There's always a sort of understanding within our team to not be necessarily the subject experts in terms of what are the most pressing social environmental challenges, but we do know that we want technology being intentionally used to drive positive outcomes for people and planet, which is why sort of the tech for good term is actually a really good umbrella to sort of encompass that all. But that sort of the existence of tech for good always implies that there's tech for bad, right? And that's always been a bit of a contentious sort of notion because quite often no one would want to say, yeah, sure, I'm here to build a tech for bad business. But ultimately, what it comes down to is sort of the three rules of technology as they were devised by a chap called Melvin Kranzberg in early on in the 20th century as well, around sort of how technology is neither good nor bad and definitely not neutral. So really understanding the the social vacuum and where technology is being adopted and developed, the people behind the technologies actually creating them, the way technologies are being distributed as well. So really going through the entire supply chain of how tech is being devised and deployed. And that's where we're really adamant around it doesn't necessarily only need to be focused on the positive outcome in terms of what you want to achieve, but also in how you're developing the technology. And that's where sort of the operationally responsible approach comes into play around. Actually, you also need to consider how you're building and who you're building it with, and not only who you're building it for, which is sort of what goes into our definition of tech for good as well.
That's amazing. I haven't heard it actually defined like that. So that's I love that in terms of everything from how it's devised to
Mm.
how it's deployed and I guess how it's managed as well, and how you kind of constantly come back to actually is this still purposeful in what it's trying to achieve. So can you just tell me about the program itself? What do founders actually get when they come through BGV?
Yeah. So we've sort of, over the past 14 years, we've always run a program. It's changed in its length. So now it's only 6 weeks of a hybrid program because apparently we love to torture ourselves and the founders. Um, but it's mostly geared towards actually coming back to sort of the basics of what does a tech for good business need to do in order to actually build responsibly and then also efficiently grow, so they can actually achieve the impact they've set out to do, but also be a profitable, sustainable business. So we can also see the return of our investments going into those businesses. So that sort of translates into actually just having a 6-week program where we focus on specific topics that we deem to be incredibly important, and have sort of fine-tuned over the last 14 years. That goes from responsible product design to impact management and management processes to actually business models, which my colleague Melanie will allegedly say is the best week of the program because it really goes into the fundamentals of how do you build a really good financial model that is sound and actually based on
Mm,
reality, and sort of work out the unit economics that you need in order to grow your business as well. We spent a week on what I call mission to market, which is really at the core of bringing how do you define your ideal customer profiles and how do you actually think about the different tactics around actually getting someone to use your product and getting someone to pay for your product without using any type of deceptive patterns in their user journey, for example, but actually just lead with the mission around actually bringing the purpose front and center and showcasing the sort of many testimonials that you can get in terms of what sort of positive impact you've had on people's life by virtue of offering your service. And then, yeah, a week sort of dedicated to team, which is really focused on
nice. Yeah.
um, how to build an inclusive team from day zero, essentially, where it's not necessarily focused so much on diversity, but really the step further around, okay, so diversity of thought is great, but how do you build a workforce and how do you build a team? How do you build a community that is actually accessible to everyone that you're trying to serve? And then the last week was really focused on sort of fundraising. And that's either with the sort of strength of, okay, now you need to raise more money, which is because £60,000 that you get from BGV takes you only so far. But
Yeah.
ultimately, the founders we want to back, we want to enable them to have a space where they can raise further money, including from BGV as well, because we have follow-on capacity to a large degree. But ultimately, we want them to get onto that trajectory where the more they grow, the more impact they have, the more sustainable the business also becomes. Because, yeah, we also live in murky times where people make purchasing decisions and change their purchasing decisions left, right, and center based on sentiment so quickly. So it
Yeah.
just really makes pertinent sense to also see what are the ways for you to be able to get to that product market fit quicker.
I mean, that's how what I always say when I'm talking to people about the challenge of Tech for Good founders is you're not only trying to build a viable, sustainable business. The reason, mostly the reason that you started it was because of the impact that you wanted to have in the world,
Yeah.
however small and big that is. And that's also a really complicated model and framework to build and work towards. So I think it's just doubly complicated to, and as you said, given the times that we're in at the moment, this is really hard. And yet this is a time that we need all businesses to be impactful. Obviously our conversation is around those kind of tech for good founders. So your role, Dharma, as a senior partner, what does that look like day to day? I know you're very busy. That's the one thing I'm aware of.
Busy, but still here, still around. So I've got the fun title of head of origination, which is such
I
a
saw that.
typical VC term, but it essentially just means I have the really fun job of talking to founders on a day-to-day basis about actually sort of considering B2B on their cap table. So we have a very sort of strict no warm introduction needed approach at our fund, because ultimately there's still a weird power dynamic in the world of VC where the people with the most connections will ultimately have easier access to capital. And that's just how trust works, right? But fundamentally, when we look at sort of the proportion of tech for good founders, quite often we see incredible talent coming from all walks of life who don't have those networks yet, which is why B2B is such a good step change for them to build those connections and build those networks, and for us to enable them to hack the system, essentially. But my job then basically just involves being incredibly transparent around what it means to take on VC money, because there are certain expectations that come with receiving equity investment for your business. And most prominent of that is actually understanding what that means in terms of what type of business do you need to build in terms of growth and scale in order to fit the sort of model of receiving equity investment. And that's where we want to enable founders who don't have that type of understanding just yet, because frankly, when I started at BGV, I didn't know what VC was. So it is a learning curve for everyone. But the conversations with founders enable us to find out, are you a good fit in terms of what you're building? Is your technology actually innovative? Do you have high ambition for impact as well? And then sort of figuring out, but does it fit a equity venture backable model where you have to grow at a certain scale in order to unlock returns for your investors? And that's usually a sort of 20-minute drop-in session, which we're currently doing because we have applications open as well. So it was super fun to do because you hear from so many founders across the UK with so many sometimes bonkers ideas, but which are largely grounded in either lived experience or close proximity to problems. So people are incredibly passionate about why they want to solve a specific problem. And then oftentimes they also have sort of technical founders who are really adamant about the sort of potential of a certain technology as well, and so incredibly enthusiastic around what is actually possible if you were to apply this to a social or environmental problem of the scale. And that's part of my job, just to talking to founders. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a great fit. You should apply, or actually signposting them to possibly other investors as well. Might be more suitable. But yeah, that's sort of part of my job. And then the rest is really, as you said, banging the drum for tech for good, which is really around actually understanding who else in the ecosystem actually wants to support more tech for good founders and who wants to invest into more tech for good businesses as well. So I do a lot of work with sort of angel networks around actually increasing awareness around these are the potential problems and challenges that exist, and where angel investment could make a meaningful difference for someone just starting out with their business. And the same also applies when it comes to sort of understanding the policy environment where people are operating in, to sort of, just advocate for better access to capital, really, because it's still pretty much geared towards a small percentage of people who all look the same.
Yeah, and that's amazing. So you talked a bit about the sort of tech for good businesses that you're particularly on the lookout for. So where there's really a kind of real desire for, significant impact. Potentially, there's some exciting tech being used, but I'm assuming not always. As well, I guess, just in a nutshell, what makes a tech for good business investable from your point of view?
Mm. I guess it's sort of two aspects, really. It's the sort of, is there the ambition to grow this into a business that can impact millions and millions of lives? Because
Mm,
it can also be within the constraints of your own little council or city, right? It
yeah,
doesn't necessarily have to be a huge scalable business. But for us, it's really around the sort of ambition for impact and the ambition for growth, which sort of goes hand in hand with how much money you might make ultimately. Um, and then I guess we sort of have the affinity towards or bias towards founders who have really complex understandings of the problems they want to solve.
yeah,
But might
amazing.
not, yeah, but might not have the sort of commercial understanding of how to build a business, which is why the BGV program is really, really good in terms of helping you get that understanding from both sides in terms of how to bring profit and purpose together. Yeah, oftentimes if we sit back when we have the applications coming in, and we usually get sort of 400 to 500 applications.
Wow.
Yeah, across all three different themes as well. But because it's so broad, we end up getting applications on subjects and problems that we would have never thought of because
Yeah,
ultimately we might not be the people affected by these problems as well. But that just is such a fun experience actually digging deeper into like, what does it mean that people have brain fog at this particular age and what more than half
I can tell you about
is
that.
affected by it? And, you
Yeah.
know, and maybe that's because we're majority female team as well. Like we have a bit more empathy towards things that have been largely underserved and underrepresented
I
in
love that.
scientific research. And so it's quite fascinating actually, like uncovering the sort of the things that we're really interested by. So it makes the selection process like such a fun process for us as well in terms of like, oh, what about this particular problem that this person is trying to solve? And oh, did you realize like in this particular domain, the potential economic impact on people's life is like massively
Mm.
possible to actually actual savings to people who are suffering. So it's such a fun process.
Yeah, and I'm quite envious of that because I would love that as a study. But those founders, should I say, those kind of brilliant tech for good organisations that maybe are not a fit for a VC pathway, what might be better routes for them?
Yeah. So it's quite hard in the UK now. Um, but there are organizations like Unlimited, who also have a really great landing page for sources of other funding for social enterprises and charitable organizations as well,
Great.
particularly around which sort of trusts and foundations continuously back social enterprises. So we usually signpost to Unlimited. We signpost to other sort of other mechanics of how you can raise money, which includes potentially getting a loan. So the startup loans from the British Business Bank, for example, are one of the ways to sort of consider actually setting up your business. Grant funding, although that's getting harder and harder,
Yeah,
um,
definitely.
especially with sort of shifts in what sort of is happening in this government. So there's much more of a focus on what does long term growth look like, which is a good thing, but also if you're sort of just at the ideation stage, there's less and less funding available to sort of just experiment and try things. There used to be the Pioneers and Ideas Fund, which
Yeah,
oh,
I remember that.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was such a brilliant fund.
Yeah.
£15,000 to like literally just try and test, kind of like the prototype fund in Germany, which is an equivalent of that, which was also focused on open source technology. So you really had a sort of commitment to what does good community tech actually look like. But yeah, hopefully there'll be more of those that will emerge. But at the moment, we usually just signpost to Unlimited, to their funding sources page, to something called Considered Capital, who have a live
Yeah.
funding database as well, which is run by Esme. which also includes quite a lot of challenge prizes. So NatWest, for example, ran a 75K award sort of pitch competition every year now, which is fundamentally great, sort of non-dilutive capital, so it won't affect your equity and your cap table. So those are really good sources of funding as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So we'll make sure we include some of those links. So you mentioned earlier you're right in the middle of a live funding round at the moment.
Yeah.
Can you just talk me through the process,
Yeah.
because you do it differently? And you mentioned right at the start, this isn't about having the right connections. This is
Yeah.
open to anyone and
Yeah.
everyone. So
Yeah.
presumably starts with an online application form.
Exactly. So there's sort of two pathways into this. So we have a very transparent open application form on our website, which people need to submit. Everyone needs to submit this in order to be considered for investment from BGV. Currently, we have applications open for our autumn program. So the program starting in September, but we make our investment decisions before the end of July. So that's sort of the timeline that we would normally spend on actually sourcing ideas and then making those making our due diligence process run smoothly so we can make those decisions. But basically anyone with a tech for good idea with a who's able to register their business in the UK and also has the right to work in the UK, because the program still has in-person elements in it as well. So they need to be able to participate in those in-person elements throughout the program. But basically anyone who fits our investment thesis can apply. And we've mostly, if we sort of look at our data as well, because we offer these sort of 20-minute drop-in sessions mostly as a way for
Mm.
founders to do their due diligence on us, not just us doing our due diligence on
Yeah,
them.
I
But
love that.
yeah, I usually talk to founders and say, like, this is a vibe check. Like, do you actually want our money or not? Which quite often is quite disarming sometimes for the founders, and be like, okay, cool, I can chill and just ask all the questions I have, which is quite helpful because it helps to sort of frame that conversation in terms of, will you get mutual benefit from actually
Exactly. It's
doing
more
that?
equal. Yeah.
Exactly. And oftentimes when people have done those drop-in sessions, they have a much higher success rate in actually getting through our process, just because
Interesting.
they're
Yeah.
able to ask a few specific questions on, like, okay, so what can I do to really boost my applications? Because ultimately, if we get sort of 400, 500 applications, we will only select 10 to 15 to invest in out of each batch. So it is a really competitive process with a 3 to 4% success rate.
Mm.
Ideally, founders do the most work in order to try to cut through the noise, because it will be quite noisy. And one of the best things is really to not use AI in writing your application. There's specific questions on, like, why do you want to come to BGV, for example? And legit, if you read like 100 applications in one go, which is oftentimes what each individual in our team does, and you read, we want BGV for the network, the capital, and blah, 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 and which is literally like ChatGPT or Claude giving
The
you the same
same.
answer. It makes it so obvious and just so disingenuous in terms of why you want to come to us. So that's one of the things I like to say, like, don't use AI to write your application.
Yeah, just tell your
Look
real story.
exactly.
So,
But
like the process is obviously very equitable, and you've kind of you talk about that quite strongly in terms of this is
yeah,
a vibe check. Like this
yeah,
is are we right for you?
yeah.
What does what does that change about who ends up in that kind of 10
Mm.
to 15, and particularly interested, given your passion as well around diversity, what does that mean in terms of social mobility, ethnicity, gender? What have you seen in terms of those patterns
Yeah.
from BGV?
So I guess once applications close, we do an online interview as well. And that's also, again, this sort of happened as a result of COVID, but we've also realized it's just much more accessible if we don't demand that everyone comes to London for the
Yeah.
interviews.
Yeah.
Because train tickets, my lord, so expensive. So one of the ways is also just being really clear on what the sort of application process actually entails. So once the application is closed, we invite up to 40 to 50 companies to interviews that happen online.
Wow. Yeah.
We give them sort of briefings around what to expect from those conversations and how they should really present in the first 5 minutes that they get, because it's not meant to be a pitch, but more of a let's show B2B what we got in a sense. But I guess in terms of how the sort of makeup then focuses on to the 10 to 15, it's really around. So we have an explicit commitment to achieve 50% gender parity. So, which means we want to back more female founders than we've previously done, and more than the industry average, which is really poor. And we're at sort of 38% at the moment, so we're not too far off from our goal. But we don't take that into our decision making as such, because we still want to focus on backing the best founders, and that's just naturally also included amazing women, amazing people who identify as non-binary, amazing men who just want to build really good tech for good businesses. So actually being able to decouple that from the investment decision process, because we ask about demographic data separately from our application form, except for gender, which is one thing that we always report on. That sort of gives us more granular data around sort of the founder demographics as well. And usually I use that data to then focus our next call for ventures or application process on going to communities where there's more founders, for example, who are focused on supporting Black entrepreneurs, or who are focused on supporting entrepreneurs with disabilities, and really just hone down on like just being more aware, spreading more awareness that B2B exists, and that we have an emphasis on wanting to back founders from all walks of life, because that ultimately also makes the world more inclusive and better.
Yeah. Well, given your point earlier, ultimately that's going to lead to more equitable technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of the businesses that you're investing in. I'm just interested to ask, like, outside of obviously the sort of diversity conversation, what do the strongest tech for good founders tend to have in common?
Haha. Good question. I was talking to someone about this week who was a founder, and then decided after years and years and years decided to close down their business, and how incredibly hard that decision was to make. But it sort of extrapolated a few sort of character traits from me as well, in terms of like, yeah, I totally get why you're an investable founder. Like you have the sheer irrational drive, and I say irrational because you dedicate so much.
Tenacity, yeah.
Yeah, and you
Like,
sacrifice so much for the pursuit of building this business. And I think that's definitely one of the sort of characteristics that really shines through. Not to say that everyone needs to be like adhering to 996, which is absolutely stupid. And we definitely also advocate for better work-life balance, and rest is so important.
oh yeah.
Um, but there's definitely the sort of piece around tenacity, the drive of wanting to solve for the problem. The people who are really able to surround themselves with people who want to contribute. So the ones that really attract top talent to work with them, the ones who are driven but also don't shy away from realizing when they make mistakes, the ones who go above and beyond of wanting to just make this work, but again, sort of for the pursuit of actually driving the impact.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
not to say that they don't care about how much money they make. They do care, because they also are in it to make money, or they're in it to actually make this into a sustainable business. So they don't have to worry about how they can provide their employees with ongoing livelihoods beyond the next month, right? But there's definitely something around that sort of tenacity piece, because it takes so much to build nowadays, and it takes so much to go against the mainstream of wanting to build something that is meaningful, and
Oh, yeah.
that is where you've chosen to build technology in a responsible way. So like, yeah, huge kudos to founders out there. Yeah.
Can you give me an example? You don't have to name them specifically, but of a founder that really stood out. What was it about them?
Oh God, I've got so many.
Or the
uh,
most recent one you can think of?
the most recent one. I guess, yeah. There's a company I'm coaching right now. I will name them. Um, a company called Cerebella. They sort of work in the menopause space, particularly around sort of providing better ways for women to um, stay in the workforce despite some of this like really severe symptoms of menopause as well, that do affect people's productivity and people's lives. And it has been so massively underserved and under researched. But it's a really solid team, and they've had experience of building a medical device company previously, so they have taken all of their lessons learned on like how to do things and how not to do things, and are building in such a in tune with what people actually want, what women in this space actually need. And so it's really serving needs, not just wants, which is so fascinating to just hear on a weekly basis, and how they're progressing with their business, how they're doing their user research, who they're talking to about these problems as well, in terms of how they might deploy it to different types of business models and revenue streams. But it always comes back to like, oh, but then the excitement of a user having tested this particular feature and actually given us this feedback is like so cool. And you can really tell that this is the thing that really drives them.
And that's everything that you've just talked about, isn't it? In terms of what's going to make a good business. It's the tenacity, it's experience that they're coming with, whether that's lived experience or whether that's actually having done some of this before. But yeah, excited to see where that business goes. So we'll share the links for that. So I'm interested, Dharma, how did you end up in Tech for Good investing?
By accident.
By accident. That's great.
Yeah. It actually came full circle because I used to go to the Tech for Good meetups in London when I was working in the charity and global development sector. And that was mostly because I was so amazed by like all the different examples of how you can use technology for good.
Yeah.
And the Tech for Good meetups were really a platform. It's not just for founders of companies limited by shares, or for academia and research, or for government civil servants to be able to sort of learn more. It was also geared towards charitable organizations to actually see examples of what you can take into your own industry. And that's what I used to do. I was like, oh, fascinating. Like, oh, they used data in order to try to tweak their onboarding process so they can deliver better services. Let's see how that can work for older people in this domain. And at some point, I got a bit jaded with how much money was being spent really inefficiently in tech development, particularly in charitable organizations, where, huge amounts of money were being spent on wireframes instead of actual
Yeah.
work that needed to be done in order to uncover what sort of user journeys someone might go through in order to highlight what disaster risk reduction could look like in a particular country, for example. Or how you might access psychosocial support for refugees when everything they heard was through word of mouth in a mosque. So what are some of the pathways for people to actually hear about these technologies, then use them? And that was then being that I was being done so poorly that I was just really jaded. I needed to like consider what else is possible in terms of tech for good, but maybe that is not dependent on chasing grant funding after grant funding and then the idea is going to die because you didn't succeed in raising funding from philanthropy. Which is why when I heard about B2B then hiring, it's like let me let me
Yeah.
dig into this,
That's amazing.
figure out how that works. That was 9 years ago.
So
So
you sit, that was 9 years ago, and you sit on the steering committee for it's Reframe Venture, isn't it? Which is all about better practices for responsible investment.
yeah,
Um, so I feel like that's definitely a key theme that we've been talking about today, and something that you're very passionate about. Um, is this kind of very much also baked into the way that you want to see BGV continue to develop over the next 5 years, and how different that is to the
yeah,
patterns that you're seeing changing elsewhere in the sort of
yeah,
VC world?
yeah, definitely. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, there's like billions and billions of assets under management from venture capitalists or from firms who claim that they're venture capitalists, but they're now hedge funds. Let's face it, by the sheer volume of investment they have. And in comparison, like B2B has roughly 50 to 60 million assets under management now, and that's after 14 years of really
Wow.
growing the sort of evidence that you can do good and do well, and that not only, I would say, a moral imperative to really channel more money into things that drive positive outcomes, you know, um, because we live in a world plagued with different types of social and environmental challenges. But also that it is just good practice to sort of consider what goes beyond shareholder capitalism and actually has stakeholder perspectives into that as well. So what sort of effect does wealth accumulation also have on the people who are using your
Yeah.
services? Um, and I think the sort of responsible investment landscape has definitely sort of changed over the last 5 to 10 years. Um, but I do think there's definitely more emphasis on actually understanding that no one needs so much wealth when there's such a huge disparity.
Mm.
Maybe there are different ways to channeling investments through different types of mechanisms like evergreen funds. There's a fund in France, for example, also investing pre-seed, pre-product, largely pre-seed and seed, purely focused on impact investing. But the way they've structured themselves is sort of through an evergreen mechanism that just continuously means whatever money they recycle goes back into the fund to keep investing.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
that's just brilliant
It's the
because
way it should always be in some, yeah.
yeah, yeah, in some ways. So I do. So BGV has, for me, always been on the forefront of actually trying things radically different from the sort of mainstream VCs. And always keeping front and center that we as a firm want to operate responsibly as well and be equitable to everyone who works here, everyone we come and get in touch with. But that's quite hard to do in isolation.
Yeah.
So having something like Reframe Ventures and different communities actually being able to collaborate with others in the ecosystem who have similar thoughts or similar ambitions as well, and to really fine tune and crystallize what does good look like, is hugely, hugely meaningful and just such a joy to be working with different community members on this as well. So there's a working group in particular now on responsible AI, and whereas the emphasis has always been like, this is how you do not do these things because this has happened as a result of someone using facial recognition technology and sold it to defense tech, and now it's being used in genocide. Those are all like pathways to then sort of help you think and help founders think about, okay, what scale is great, but also do I want my technology being used for killing innocent civilians? Absolutely not. So I can put guardrails into place now that just
Mm.
ensure that I can mitigate those things from happening as I grow and scale my business. And that's equally also important to have those conversations as an investor. And like you cannot claim to be a tech for good investor if then the companies, the third party effects of the companies who they're selling to ultimately causes harm in the world. So I think there's definitely been a shift in terms of actually understanding the nuances of these conversations. And that's where things like Reframe Venture are actually really helpful ground to have those conversations in a more meaningful way.
I'm interested to know whether it feels therefore less isolating now than perhaps in the earlier part of your time at BGV, or does it? Or do you feel like it's actually just a constant battle, actually, and a lot of advocacy required all the time?
It's such a good question. So the surprising change for me from sort of going from non-profit to for-profit has been in actually understanding how incredibly collaborative the for-profit world is, even when it comes to like making deals and making investments. And that's been I never anticipated that. And that's mostly because I always thought private markets are private for a reason. But there are sort of mechanisms in place that just allow you to collaborate more effectively, which I was just so impressed by. But to your question, I think there's definitely been changes in terms of who else is really keen on sort of banging the drum for tech for good. And we've definitely also seen more changes in sort of changes in politicians and changes in government in terms of what sort of emphasis is being put on social investment in general, impact investing. But all in all, I think there will be times, ebbs and flows, where you have to preserve your energy. But now is a good time to be out and about again to sort of actually make the case for let's not use a dirty data center for the AI technology
Exactly.
to develop, or let's make more conscious decisions about where you're putting, how your pension money is going to be used in terms of what type of investments will be made from those as well. So there's incredible power from the individual to make more conscious decisions. We just have sort of the information asymmetry, which is why I think there's merit to being out and about again to bang the drum.
Bang the drum. I love your phrase for that. So what's the actual next step for maybe somebody listening who thinks that this might be for them? And I would ask you whether, obviously we're kind of primarily talking about founders here, but potentially other investors, other operators, people who also want to support some of this kind of responsible investment, responsible innovation, responsible technology. What would you say?
Yeah. I would say if you're a founder super interested in tech for good and you happen to be in the Southwest, go join Tech for Good Southwest events.
I didn't even prompt you for that.
And then more broadly, if you're based in London, do come to our events in London as well. But also we will go out into different cities across the UK again as well, because we love to actually come where founders are. But generally, if you're a founder really interested in tech for good, I think it's really worthwhile exploring what type of funding you might need and what type of business you actually want to build. Really try to figure out those steps first before you seek either equity investment, grant funding, or anything else. If you're an investor or just someone really interested in tech for good as well, we run sort of community events, sort of coffee mornings where we invite people from all walks of life to really come along. If you're wanting to join a company as well, do get in touch, because we'll start building sort of a talent pool for some of our founders as well, particularly if they're looking for co-founders. So stay tuned. But generally, I do feel like the best way is to really connect with people who are already in the space, and there's so many different tech for good groups across the UK. So definitely join any of those.
Yeah. Thank you, Dama. And like, there's so much richness in our conversation and so much alignment. And obviously you're part of the Tech for Good Southwest community. So that's also a way in which people can connect. And I think you talked about it as well. It's about being highly collaborative. Everybody's got some skills and expertise to bring to this conversation. And I see BGV as such a brains trust, 14 years of actually really building a really kind of intentful process that is really getting some great diversity, but also some amazing businesses out there as well. And that kind of championing of responsibility, this really matters. So I think this, and thank you for today. You've given us like a lot clearer picture in terms of the types of founders that you really want to see be successful in the world, what might be possible for them. And so for anyone listening who wants to find out more, apply or refer a founder. And it's a very open process and you're very approachable as an organization. So just get in touch with BGV. We'll have all the links in the show notes. And if today's conversation has sparked something for you, we'd love to hear from you as well. So thank you so much, Dama. And until next time, to everybody listening, keep connecting, keep building, and keep using technology for good. Thank you so much, Dama, for our conversation today.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for being here with us today. Please do share this episode with a friend or colleague who cares about using technology as a force for good. The more people who hear these stories, the more chance we have to inspire real action. You can find out more about Tech for Good Southwest, explore our programs, or join our membership community at techforgoodsouthwest.org. From the Southwest and beyond, keep connecting, keep building, and together, let's make technology a force for good.